Now to that tragic story out of Santa Barbara. A surf shop owner accused of killing his 2 young children in Mexico. We are learning more details this morning. They're tough details, and this is a tough story. The FBI says 40-year-old Matthew Coleman confessed to killing his 2 children, 2-year-old son, 10-month-old daughter, with a spear gun before dumping their bodies.
The late 2010s saw a shocking rise in conspiracy theories across the U.S. Perhaps the most notorious of all was the QAnon theory, which suggests that the government is run by Satanists that abuse and devour babies, run a global child trafficking ring, and that want to topple Donald Trump's government. Today we're going to talk about one of the most heartbreaking incidents caused by the QAnon movement and its bizarre beliefs, the case of Matthew Taylor Coleman, also known as a QAnon dad. It would have been bad enough if Coleman's 2 victims had been adults. As it turns out, they were infants, with the older of the pair being just 2 years old. And to make things even more twisted, they were Coleman's own children. We'll unpack this gruesome series of events that took Coleman and his 2 young children across the border to Mexico, where he dealt them a brutal fate. But first, we must understand the man he used to be and how unbelievable it was he'd do something like this. In 1981, John and Lori Coleman had their first child, a baby boy who they named Matthew, although most came to know him as Matty. The boy seemed to have had the perfect childhood in the sunny coastal city of Santa Barbara, where he learned to surf and ride dirt bikes. By all accounts, Coleman's childhood was almost perfect. He seemed to have no trouble mingling with the girls either, although he had some trouble understanding boundaries with them. In one incident during his teens, Coleman and another boy allegedly cornered a girl in an incident she saw as sexual harassment, indicating that he wasn't the well-adjusted child everyone thought him to be. Something dark lurked under the surface, but no one could see it just yet. However, Coleman seemed to change when he entered high school. He took a sudden interest in Christianity, an interest that was so intense that he could often be seen carrying around a Bible. This interest was no doubt encouraged by his parents, both of whom were devout Christians themselves. They considered Coleman to be a gift from God. Coleman's Christian streak only got more obsessive as he grew older. He decided to attend an evangelical college in San Diego and even went on missionary trips to foreign countries. One of these trips took him to Mexico, where he'd one day return to commit an unspeakable act of brutality against 2 innocents that saw him as their protector. Ironically, Coleman actually showed a profound, wholesome love for children at this stage in his life. According to John Harris, an assistant pastor at Shoreline Community Church, Coleman was always ready to help a child in need. He often helped them do their homework, though he also made sure to mentor them in the ways of the Bible. In all fairness, while Coleman definitely seemed very devout, he wasn't exactly radical in his beliefs. He just wanted to live a life of Christian values. One major aspect of this was starting a family, but Coleman didn't really find that special someone to settle down with until much later in life. Abby Droogsma was your typical all-American girl. Born and raised in Texas, Abby was the sort of person that always wanted to live by the Bible. She always wanted a good Christian man to start a family with, so she'd often go looking for suitors at church groups and other religious events. It was at one of these church groups that she ran into Matthew Coleman. Their chance encounter happened on January 8, 2017, and Abby was immediately attracted to the dashing, devout man who mentored kids in his spare time. They shared a passion for physical activity, with Abby frequently participating in CrossFit classes and encouraging others to get fit. At 36 years old, Coleman was a full 5 years older than Abby. This age gap might have seemed attractive to him because it gave him a sense of authority over the younger woman. Whatever the case may be, both of them found an instant connection and decided to get married not long after they met. It was around this time that the QAnon conspiracy started to take root, and over the next few years, it would poison and ultimately break Coleman's mind. Coleman wanted to live near a beach so he could keep surfing. Abby happened to love the beach too, so the couple rented a ranch house near Hendry Beach, a popular surfing site. This allowed Coleman to start up a surfing school, and once the money started coming in, the couple decided it was time to start a family. What Abby didn't realize was that her children would end up falling prey to their father's violent urges before too long. Their first child, a son they named Kaleo, was born in 2019. His little sister Roxy was born in late 2020. Neighbors reported that Abby was a good mother to the children, often taking them out on walks, where she'd make sure to stop for a friendly chat with the people next door. Abby also loved baking banana bread for her neighbors, along with many other gestures of communal friendship. The picture the community paints of Abby is one of a loving mom, a friendly neighbor, and an all-around good person. Coleman wasn't seen in such a warm light because he usually kept to himself. But the couple shared a tendency to believe in conspiracy theories, and in 2020, something happened that kicked their dubious beliefs into high gear. The pandemic was a rough time for most people, but the Colemans actually did better than before. People needed outdoor activities for their kids that involved social distancing. Surfing usually doesn't involve getting close to other people. It's just you, your surfboard, and the waves. As a result, Coleman's business started booming during the lockdowns. But all was not well in his household. As we've already mentioned, his wife was rather gullible and quickly believed false narratives about the world. For one thing, she was known to be a part of Facebook groups that promoted anti-vaxxing theories. She believed, without any evidence, that the vaccines being made for COVID were somehow dangerous. This was a belief that ran in her family as well, with her family members posting to Facebook about how the pandemic was a planned conspiracy and how the Democratic Party was run by Satanists. As for Coleman, his belief in conspiracy theories had already taken root by the time he settled down. He seemed to believe in something called the Great Awakening, a conspiracy theory that Donald Trump was going to arrest the supposed child abusers and traffickers that controlled the country and restore America to greatness. These beliefs also affected how he saw his children. He felt that Roxy was being born at a time of great change, that she'd see a new dawn emerge in the country. But at the same time, he thought that the government might be run by powerful, demonic figures that started making him extremely paranoid.
There has been an awakening. Have you felt it?
Supporters of QAnon were out in full force at President.
By the summer of 2021, Coleman firmly believed everything that the QAnon conspiracy suggested. He knew in his heart that Donald Trump was fighting a group of child abusers and traffickers and that he was going to bring about an era of change. But that was just the tip of the iceberg. Abby was also part of his descent into the world of conspiracy. She apparently believed in QAnon as well, which seemed to be a trend among evangelical Christians. Even so, Abby had stated that her husband took things to a whole other level. All of a sudden, everything seemed like a conspiracy to Coleman. More importantly, everything started to seem like a threat. He started noticing people making hand gestures, which he saw as secret signals to harm him and his family. And when he noticed his own friends making the same gestures, he became convinced that they were out to get him too. It is important to note that these gestures could be as simple as making the peace sign. To Coleman's fracturing mind, these common gestures were directed threats to him, and he believed that he needed to take drastic measures. And it wasn't just his family he was worried about either. At some point during 2021, Coleman started to believe that he might just be the only sane person on the planet. Everyone seemed insane to him. Nobody was taking his concerns seriously, not even Abby, who later said that he was taking things too far. In early August of that year, the Colemans decided to plan a family trip. They needed to get out of town and go somewhere they'd feel safe. For Coleman, the walls seemed to be closing in. Everyone was his enemy, especially his friends. He started taking screenshots on social media of every individual making one of these so-called secret hand gestures. That's when he found a picture of his friend holding up the peace sign and became convinced that he was being set up. Coleman was completely divorced from reality by this point. In his view, the devil worshippers in Washington were trying to get to him, and they'd gone so far as to recruit his friends to do it. It's important to know that he broke off contact with many people he'd known since childhood, all because he thought they were trying to plan something evil against him. And if that wasn't enough, Coleman's obsessions with conspiracy theories wasn't just restricted to QAnon. He also started to look into older and more bizarre theories that suggested the whole world was run by a shadow organization of lizard people. These were not the thoughts of a rational man. Indeed, these thoughts belonged to a man who was a danger to everybody, including himself, and particularly his own family. As the family prepared for their trip, Coleman started getting some truly devastating, intrusive thoughts. If his friends were in on the conspiracy, who else might be involved? Could his own wife be working against him as well? And what about his children? An analysis of Coleman's behavior in the lead up to the incident suggests that his thoughts were racing, and he was having trouble seeing things clearly. All he knew was that he had to do something. And on the morning of August 7th, he decided to take action. Abby was busy packing for the family trip that morning. The sun was bright, the weather was great, and she was looking forward to spending some quality time with her husband and children. It was at this point that Coleman picked up both his kids and put them in his car and drove off without a word. Abby was understandably concerned. This was extremely erratic behavior from her husband. He hadn't even taken the children's car seats, indicating that he'd left in a frantic rush. She immediately phoned the police, but clarified that she didn't believe the children were in danger. After all, how could her good Christian husband hurt any child, let alone his own? She was wrong, of course, but then again, Abby was wrong about many things. Hours after Coleman departed, the friend he'd accused of using secret hand gestures came over. He may have wanted to offer his friend's wife some comfort at this time, but the reaction he got was shocking to say the least. Instead of welcoming this family friend into the home, Abby pulled out a picture from 10 years ago where his unnamed friend was making the supposed secret gesture. She then accused him of being in on the whole conspiracy and kicked him out of the house. During this whole time, Coleman was driving further and further away from his Santa Barbara home. He was headed for Mexico, where the bloody climax of this tale will take place. Coleman and his children arrived in Mexico on August 8th. The culprit booked a hotel room, and as he lay in bed, all the pieces started to come together. He claimed that he saw the whole web of conspiracy like code in the Matrix. He felt like Neo when he could see the computer construct for what it truly was. But one of the pieces of hallucinatory code that floated before Coleman's views sent a chill down his spine. He realized that his wife must be in on it. She must be part of the lizard people harming kids across the country. And if she was a lizard person, that meant that she'd passed her serpent DNA onto their children. In this complete break from reality, Coleman knew that there was only one thing he could do. No matter how much he loved his children, he couldn't allow them to grow up and become the mutant alien monsters that he believed were controlling the world. You might think that Coleman was completely isolated at this point, but you'd be wrong. He and Abby had been texting the whole time, although he gave no indication that he'd found out about her supposed connection to the lizard people. His wife told him that she missed him and that she'd found comfort while reading his grandmother's old Bible. In response, Coleman said, "Hi babe, miss you too. Things have been rough but starting to get some clarity as well. Still confused on a lot of things though and processing through them. So many crazy thoughts going through my head right now, hard to explain. Yeah, funny you're getting some clarity through my grandma's old Bibles. Wasn't there two? Anyways, was actually still thinking of burning them in case there's a chip in them or something. Going to keep processing through everything and hope to get some answers. Hope all this craziness ends soon. Love you." These messages, which were exchanged at 3:12 a.m., clearly show that Coleman was past the point of no return. 2 hours later, he'd commit one of the most unimaginably cold-blooded acts anyone could perform. At around 5 a.m., as dawn started breaking over the Mexican horizon, Coleman drove his children to a nearby ranch. The open fields were calm at that time of day and quiet. Coleman parked his car and took his children out, along with a certain item that he intended to use. This item was a spearfishing gun, and its razor-sharp point must have glinted in the dim light, right before it would be covered in the thick, red blood of its victims. Kaleo and Roxy were 2 years and 11 months old respectively. Coleman would have had to carry Roxy out of the car since she was too young to walk. As for Kaleo, he'd probably recently learned to walk, so there's a chance that he just toddled along behind his father. He trusted him. Why wouldn't he? This was the man that had protected him all his life. There's no way to know exactly how the next few minutes went down. All we can say for sure is this: Coleman picked up his spearfishing gun and started wildly stabbing at his children. Kaleo was stabbed 17 times and Roxy was stabbed 12 times, all in the chest. They died on the spot, but Coleman didn't seem to feel any remorse for his actions. Instead, he just hid their bodies under some nearby brush, got back in his car, and made for the US-Mexico border. Not long after, 47-year-old Roberto Salinas Ramirez woke up on his farm. When he headed out, his neighbor told him he'd seen a massive amount of blood right outside his home. Roberto saw the blood and started investigating. It took him a while to find the bodies under the willow brush. They were tiny and pale, difficult to spot in the rocky ground. Both children were naked except for their diapers. Shaken and distraught, Roberto called the police. Hundreds of miles away in Santa Barbara, Abby finally decided to file a missing persons report after not hearing from her husband that morning. During this time, Coleman approached the border, where he was stopped for a security check. When border agents found blood in his van, they immediately took him into custody and called the FBI. Agents soon arrived, and Coleman started confessing his gruesome crimes. He told them his fears about his wife's serpent DNA and that his children might have been infected by it. He told them everything, and the FBI agents couldn't do much but listen to the horrific story. Coleman was on the hook for the homicide of U.S. nationals on foreign soil. He pleaded not guilty, and after a psychological evaluation, a judge deemed him mentally incompetent to stand trial in October of 2023. Instead, it appears that Coleman will be sentenced to mandatory psychiatric treatment. However, Coleman's descent into madness didn't stop while he was in federal lockup. Reports suggest that he repeatedly tries to harm himself with razor blades, forcing prison officials to medicate him against his will. While he awaits a hearing that will transfer him from federal lockup to a psychiatric facility, he was to grapple with what he'd done. Meanwhile, Abby's life is now completely destroyed, but she's managed to profit from the death of her children. A GoFundMe set up in their name reportedly received over $100,000 in donations. But no matter how much money she receives, Abby will have to live with the fact that she encouraged Coleman to go deeper into the conspiracy pit, and that her children's lives were horrifically ended as a result. What do you think of this case? Do you think Matthew Taylor Coleman deserved to go to jail, or perhaps even the death penalty? Share your thoughts in the comments below. If you want more videos like this, please be sure to like the video, subscribe, and hit the notification bell so you don't miss out on more true crime videos. See you in the next one.